Leave. Hello everyone. We're doing our presentation today on Kubrick and Kulture. Stanley Kubrick, the man, the myth, the legend. He was born in 1928 and he died in 1999. He is regarded as one of the most influential and greatest directors of all time, and has influenced countless directors, modern directors including Christopher Nolan, Martin Scorsese, Ridley Scott, Tim Burton, and countless artists. Like I said, these are one of the greatest directors of all time, and he only won one Oscar. But many critics say not because he wasn't a great director, because whenever he did his films, they were so ahead of their time that they weren't critically acclaimed until afterwards. So it wasn't that he wasn't being judged on his merit correctly. It was so ahead of his time, people didn't know what they were doing. They were ready for it. That's life. Space Odyssey. So his first film is based on. It doesn't have a coherent plot like most films. It's very box office success. It set the ground for future space films. Any film that talks about or features space today had inspiration directly or indirectly through this film. It was decades ahead of time. It really was. Watching this film, it also foretold countless technological advances that weren't present during that time, but were going to be present in the future. Here you see that scene on the left. That's in the film, and that looks like any other space film that you watch today. That same structure, that same space-like theme and visual appearance. And then the picture to the right, that's actually a scene where they were doing a video call. So in the 60s, Kubrick called out Skyping and FaceTiming, 40 years ahead of his time. There's also another scene where they talk about hibernation. They also talk about a whole bunch of other array of things, like the iPad. There's a literally it looks just like an iPad. It's like a tablet type thing with a screen, and you can interact with it. So you can say that Apple and Microsoft copied from this film in the 60s. Next slide. Next video. Just a couple of influences in film that iconic soundtrack that you hear all the time. That's on Interstellar. of it, it parallels exactly what Star Wars was.
I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in your shape. And I want to help you.
What are you doing, Gabe?
I'm going to try and break you away from the computer cartridge. I need to remove the CPU.
I'm afraid I can't let you do that, Gabe.
Screw you, fat ass!
Screw you.
There was no beating around the bush. A Space Odyssey has directly impacted a whole bunch of films, including Toy Story, Simpsons, as you saw, and it influenced so many films today, or not even today, throughout the whole period after the movie was made. The song also does Zarathustra. That's the song that you hear in the beginning. That's the one with the monkeys. That song is synonymous with great discovery. It's a very powerful song, and it was first used in the film. And the film itself also was talking about culture, and specifically because in the late '60s we were still directly involved in the Cold War and the space race, and in the film it talked about the U.S. and the Soviets trying to figure out what's happening with these monoliths that showed up. So, like I said, Space Odyssey was made in the '60s, but has defined sci-fi for the past 40, 50 years, almost 50. And then I'll be talking about the next scene. And it's gonna what Stanley Kubrick did in A Space Odyssey. It's nothing. It falls nothing short of what is this? What is this? I don't understand. Stop that! Excuse me! Stop it now! I'm HAL 9000. Human error will not be accounted for. What is this? Excuse me.
Get over there in that corner.
What?
Get over there in that corner.
No! Why? Must be human error.
Alright, now to the real part of the presentation. Maybe you have to have some messed up. Thank you, darling. I'm sure you'll find it a real horror show. We get a little bit of the back, though. Okay, so my presentation is A Clockwork Orange, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick and released in 1971. It follows the story of Alex, which is a violent delinquent gang leader who eventually gets arrested for the murder of a woman who undergoes an experimental treatment to become herself. Basically, the film questions the reliability of this treatment and whether so-called sociopaths can become reformed civilians to be later reintroduced into society. So, after successfully completing this treatment that involves aversion therapy, he is released from prison, but struggles to assimilate back into society. After rehab from a near-fatal accident, he realizes he is cured, but we do not know exactly from what. So the themes of the film are violence, reform and transformation, free will, and morality and ethics. So in terms of the violence, it was really controversial in the very beginning because prior films were not really seen as super duper violent the way that this film was. The character feels excitement and joy when inflicting physical and psychological pain. Get back in that corner. And then it shows explicit and gruesome acts of violence, which were really shocking to the audience when it came out. In terms of performance transformation, the general question about whether Alex was reformed at all is really the big thing. So his final remark was coupled with this monogamous fantasy that he has, which raises the question about whether he was cured and he was a reformed man and he went back to his original state. So before he underwent this controversial aversion therapy, he was a super violent and sociopathic character. After he goes to therapy, which involves being drugged so that he can get some kind of aversion to the aggression, he's supposedly this reformed man, but then at the end of the film, he eventually gets reintroduced into society, but he's not able to assimilate because people don't welcome him. So what happens is that he ends up in many situations where he interacts with people that he'd been violent to prior, and it doesn't end very well. So eventually he tries to jump off the building, and then he's really hurt, and after undergoing physical rehabilitation, there's an incident in the end where the therapist shows him pictures of sort of violent acts and how he's supposed to react, and he reacts the same way that he did initially. He found it enjoyable or cool. So then free will, after undergoing the therapy, some view the result of a non-violent Alex as a success, and then others view his inability to freely make the moral choice a failure. In terms of morality and ethics, more than the ultra-violence, the government's interference in Alex's freedom of choice backfires on them. They embark on an ethically questionable practice and later dismissed it all to save face. So in the very end, the government sort of strikes a deal with him so that the public could have this better perception of the government that they weren't at fault for what happened to Alex. So one of the more obvious qualities of Clockwork Orange is its overt depiction of violence. Clockwork Orange was released in a prime time for concern regarding media violence. So in the 60s is when people really began to perform in-depth psychological studies on the effects of media violence on children. And then this movie came out right there in 1972, which was right in the prime of when this was beginning to be noticeable. So today, there was a persistent fear that watching violent films would result in aggressive behavior in children that would lead them to become violent adults later on in life. So this was one of the big worries when this movie came out and why it got so much backlash. So now we're going to watch the video.
Linking violence in movies to higher levels of aggression and violent behavior. Recognizing that many children love violent movies, parents are wondering how to gauge which movies their kids should be watching or if their children should be seeing violence at all.
Psychotics and homicidal and other dangerous types. But juvenile delinquency is, I think, a symptom of the illness of our age.
Their adolescent brains, when compared to adult brains, are especially vulnerable to what they see, hear, and experience. They are still building their beliefs about the world, about other people, and about themselves.
Okay, so in terms of cultural impact, the British press and the rise of the copycat crimes. So after the film was released, a series of crimes came about that were similar to the crimes that he would commit. So people dressing up as Alex and then going out and committing acts of violence. Or, and then eventually, well, Kubrick was not a proponent of the the idea that violent films trigger violent behavior. So although the British press covered this as blaming Kubrick in his movie for one of the reasons for the rise in crime, he said that movies alone cannot actually perpetuate acts of violence. However, eventually the film does get banned, and that's something by Kubrick's doing after a Dutch girl gets gang raped by a group of boys that were singing along to Singing in the Rain. So these events, though disturbing, are arguably the fault of Clockwork Orange. So one of the things that I think is really cool about the movie and what it does in terms of society is it makes you question about the effects of media violence on its audience. If it really does have much of a this kind of effect, or if it's this coupled with something else. So that's one of the big questions that this film raised, and why it was also so controversial at the time. So because the movie did not shy away from sex and violence, it pushed the boundaries of what was socially acceptable at the time in terms of what was being shown in film. By today's standards, A Clockwork Orange is not exceptionally violent. Not too many people actually died compared to movies that we have nowadays. But considering the year of its release, it was groundbreaking in what it did. And here we have some pop culture references, how it's impacted culture even today. So it's been featured like Clockwork Orange references on The Simpsons many times. Here we have Madonna and Rihanna's video "You the One," right there. Also David Bowie and Led Zeppelin have all added to this references to Clockwork Orange. And then a relevance question posed: should it be acceptable to use science to take away someone's free will for the greater good, as the government tries to do with Alex? If someone has always been violent, is there a chance for reform? And is the government always acting in people's best interests? And this is relevant even today with, for example, prison rehabilitation programs, if they should be funded, whether they work, or even like you see it in this past election, like the distrust in government has been rising pretty steadily, and it's all like the same thing. So these are timeless themes that were relevant then and are still relevant now, and will probably still be relevant tomorrow.
Little piggies, let me in by the hair on my chinny chin chin.
Would any of you lovely Becks like to get the door? Maybe you right there.
Here's Johnny! Would you happen to have seen my son, Danny?
Well, I haven't seen your son Danny, and you're quite the ugly Beck. But judging by your presence, I might come back with some of my droogs.
Mr. Grady, why'd you bring me over here? You should be looking for my son, little precious Danny.
Your son and your wife were causing too many human errors and had to be dealt with.
Oh, how? What should we do to deal? You're not Mr. Grady.
I am HAL 9000. And I
don't give a shit.
Countless human errors. Countless.
Alright, I'm Mr. Grady, the real Mr. Grady. Wanted me to give you guys a presentation on the horror film The Shining. So, after that I get to go after my son, so I'm gonna make this real quick for you guys. Alright, so if you guys have not seen the best horror movie ever made, The Shining is Stanley Kubrick's only film to have not garnered a single Oscar nomination. It was actually nominated for 2 Razzies, which are considered like the worst films ever for worst actress and worst director. Now, Stanley Kubrick is not big on cohesive plots, so I'm not going to go through the trouble of trying to explain it to you guys, but it's pretty much this guy Johnny, he's given access to the Overlook Hotel, and He's supposed to look after it during its off season when no one's there, and he kind of goes mad in the isolation. And his son, Danny, has this weird gift called the Shining where he could telepathically talk to people, he could see ghosts. It's an interesting movie. The tortured artist, he's a writer, so he's been trying to write a novel the entire time. He thinks being isolated will give him some creative juices in his head, and it's given me a few. And I gotta say, it has a very bleak image on human nature. These people are not necessarily as good as they can be, and they can be pretty... Now, one of the techniques Stanley Kubrick brought into this film that is a staple now for most horror films is the aerial streamline camera technique. Kind of like, it feels like you're almost a ghost just flying over. It's done through a helicopter and you're just flying over landscapes. Usually you put ominous music, it creates a feeling of unease. And I've shown a little clip right here after this that shows the intro to The Shining and some of its influences. Doesn't look like a Hallmark movie to me. Now here's a little influence of that scene. You can see it in a couple other films and short videos that they kind of use this technique very well too to create a kind of sense of unease. And so, now, speaking of jump scares, The Shining doesn't have that many of them. And it was one of the first movies to start incorporating that. Now, Kubrick utilized other techniques to create this, like, The Shining is considered one of the most frightening movies ever made, but when you think of movies like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch, it's scary. There's all these people jumping out every other second, you kind of expect it. With this movie, you don't even know what's going on in the movie, so you're already terrified with the music and the killings and all and such. So he used different techniques, definitely with the screenplay, which he wrote. Zoom in shots to the faces of Johnny all like looking scary. Fast cuts. We sometimes jump from Danny talking with his little finger to Scatman Carruthers on the other side of the world hearing in through The Shining. Very, very interesting techniques. And I gotta say, it strayed away from clear-cut existential horror. Like when you see the Halloween, Friday the 13th, this one dude that's just terrifying. But this movie, everything about it, the whole tale is just scary. And it creates this different sense of unease, a psychological unease. And films that were inspired by these techniques, Insidious, Sinister, still can't watch Sinister, it's too scary. And Get Out, actually. Jordan Peele definitely references The Shining as one of his influences when he made Get Out. Now, if you guys don't mind, I'm kind of on the verge of writing something real good. I'm gonna grab a desk, if you don't mind. I'm gonna throw it on. Now the influences of The Shining. Have you guys, who hasn't seen the movie? Have you seen those two girls? Aren't they creepy? Aren't they freaking creepy?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep writing my thing. Now, if you look at behind this good sir over here, you also know Here's Johnny. When I came in with my little entrance, you knew something. You knew something similar. You kind of expected it because you've heard that phrase before in other films, other TV shows. The whole red rum, spoiler alert, spell it backwards. And this film has also kind of brought out a lot of conspiracy theories as well. Room 237 is a documentary that supposedly says The Shining was actually made for different reasons. They're saying it's about the American Indian genocide, apparently. About Stanley Kubrick faking the moon landing. And the last one, I believe, jeez. Fakes the moon landing. It's Native American genocide. I'm running blanks. But all work. Do you guys think that's a good line for a movie? All work, no play makes Johnny a dull boy. I didn't get to finish it. I just had it in my head. All work, no play makes Johnny a dull boy. My masterpiece. You've been bothering me.
Why does it say the same thing over and over again?
It's because it's my freaking masterpiece. Screw Mr. Grady, I'm gonna settle down for a minute.
Must be cabin fever. Getting started on it. So, Eyes Wide Shut was directed by Kubrick, released in 1999. The plot is about a married couple named Bill and Alice who are having trouble with their marriage. And one night they get high on cannabis and end up arguing about fidelity within their relationship. And this kind of upsets Bill, so he storms out and leaves, and with the intent of cheating. And he ends up finding out about this secret sex club that's for the upper class elite, and gets in danger because of it. So the themes of the film, it's Kubrick's films are usually they're usually conspiracy theories about him a lot because they're so bizarre and unconventional. So when the film is actually meant to talk about fidelity and monogamy, conspiracy theorists argue that it has a lot of satanic undertones and it's actually trying to expose the Illuminati. So the reason for this is because there was a lot of fear during this time because the film was released in 1999. So people were afraid of the turn of the millennia with computers. Like that's why the Y2K scare happened. So just that general fear was responsible for the conspiracy theories. And yeah. So this video is going to show a little bit about
Eyes Wide Shut being one of the very key cornerstone movies that people come back to when they talk about reasons that Stanley Kubrick may or may not have been gotten rid of for trying to expose various secrets that he may or may not have been privy to.
I'll give the big secret out. He was, but without getting into details, he was dialed into the ether of what they were doing so they could see him, he could see them, and that was why he had to hide out in England and was so tortured and freaked out.
And yes, the fact is that Stanley Kubrick did die precisely 666 days before January 1st, 2001. Of course, the beginning of the year that he made famous with, 2001, March 7th, 1999. Again, make of that what you will. Perhaps more importantly, it was precisely 4 days after having shown the final cut, his final cut of Eyes Wide Shut, to the producers at Warner Brothers, and precisely 4 days later he died of a heart attack, which was a shock to his family.
the New World Order, the pedophile rings, all this stuff, you think there's something really funny going on here.
Well, I'll just say this. They did come after Stanley Kubrick for what he was doing. And they wanted to know how he knew. And he didn't even know. He just said, I just had this idea, and this is it, and why are they so angry? It was like he was just dialed into what was going on.
Stanley Kubrick, who shot the moon landing.
I would say that's a very good theory for a number of reasons. Number one, the moon landings were fake. So they could either hire the media director at the Pentagon and get great security and amateur results, or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet and get great results short term. Additionally, he stipulated in his contract of his very last film, interestingly named Eyes Wide Shut, because people can see a picture of a man on the moon and not see all the obvious reasons why the picture is fake.
So, why are conspiracy theories so common? Well, for one, they're very easy to construct and reinforce through the use of unfalsifiable statements. So an example of an unfalsifiable statement is saying, an alien spaceship crashed in Roswell, New York. So in order for us... Hello? Oh. Yes. The bodies? Just take them down to the river. Just get it done, I don't care. We're in the middle of the presentation. Bye. Sorry guys. Should not have it done. So anyways, in order for a scientific statement to have any sort of standing, it has to have the possibility of being proven wrong. That must always persist. So the problem with unfalsifiable statements is there's no way to prove them. Hello? Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. How goes the Kosovo problem? Nothing our organization can't fix. 1 million sounds reasonable. We need some weapons too? Sounds perfect. Glad to hear this. Sorry, it shouldn't happen. Anyways, so yeah. So the problem with unfalsifiable statements is that there's no way to prove them wrong, because you would have to exhaust every single possibility that exists, and that would be your only form of evidence. So, which is pretty much impossible. Well, what is it? What is this? What? No, I don't know where Dan is. What? Why are you screaming? So, yeah, it would be pretty much impossible to exhaust every single possible thing. So, anyone that believes in a conspiracy theory can easily say the government's hiding the spaceship parts. However, with a falsifiable statement, it only takes one observation to disprove it. So if I rephrase that statement and say no alien spaceships have ever landed in Roswell, New Mexico, then it would only take one spaceship to do that. So if conspiracy theories lack scientific evidence, why do people still believe in them? Well, in a world where most people lack scientific literacy, it's easy to rationalize and not be aware of different fallacies. And the other thing is that they provide answers to the unknown and comfort people when bad things happen. So an example of this is when Selena Quintanilla died. A lot of people blamed her death on the Illuminati because when she went to the hospital, her father refused giving her a blood transfusion for religious reasons. But a lot of people think that it was because they sacrificed her to the Illuminati, he had to let her die. It's like recompense. And the other thing is that they're really easy to believe and get lost in. Like I know when I was doing research, I just started watching Illuminati videos like left and right just for fun. It's like I was like, oh shit, like these are interesting. And yeah, Conspiracies in pop culture. So conspiracies are basically pop culture because they revolve around everything that's in pop culture. So you have the conspiracy memes making fun of Illuminati and stuff, and like pretty much every conspiracy has to do with like a celebrity or something that's going on in the news that's catastrophic. Yeah. So yeah. And if I can you go get Danny? Can you go get Danny? No? I need someone to do it. How about you? Thank you.
You guys have any questions?
Yeah, why? Why we?
Wait.